I want to bring to your attention one of my best stories on the channel. It's longer than the others, but definitely worth listening to. Have a good time. Chapter 1. Just another day. Jack Morrison never figured he'd be caught between a rock and a hard place, forced to choose between duty and getting even. At 35, he was a model detective with the Phoenix PD, and his wife, Sarah, was a warden at the local maximum security prison. Life seemed like a piece of cake until one ordinary workday turned into a total nightmare, changing his whole deal about loyalty, justice, and what was right and wrong. The morning kicked off like any other with the smell of fresh brewed joe. Sarah was standing at the stove in her fave silk pajamas, her auburn hair in a messy bun. Jack, already in uniform, was sitting at the kitchen table, thumbing through the morning paper. Sunlight streamed through the blinds, laying stripes across the tabletop like a jailhouse window, an irony that would hit him hard later. "How about dinner at Old Charlie's tonight?" Sarah asked, slapping a plate of scrambled eggs down in front of him. "It's been ages since we hit the town." Jack looked up from the paper. His wife was giving him that special smile that always got to him. 10 years hitched, and she still made his heart skip a beat. Tonight, he took a swig of coffee, thinking about his upcoming shift. "I dunno, babe. I'm on duty till 8, barring anything big." "Come on, Jack." She perched next to him, putting a hand on his shoulder. "You say that every time. I booked a table for 9. One night, and the city won't fall apart without its star detective." There was a coaxing tone in her voice, and Jack caved. After all, what could go wrong on a regular Thursday? Their third-floor apartment was the spitting image of what realtors call a cozy family nest. Jack never got that definition until he and Sarah moved in 7 years back. Light walls decked with photos from their trips together and diplomas, his from the police academy, hers from corrections college. The soft rug in the living room swallowed the sound of their steps, and the kitchen window looked out on a quiet courtyard. In the hallway, their uniform jackets hung on hooks. His navy blue, hers gray, with Arizona Department of Corrections patches. They were both doing their part upholding the law, even if they were on opposite sides of the bars. He nabbed the bad guys on the streets of Phoenix. She kept them locked up at Lewis Prison. Their co-workers always joked that crooks didn't stand a chance in their family. They'd get caught by either him or her. The morning routine had been honed to clockwork over the years. While Jack checked his sidearm, Sarah got their badges and IDs ready, stashing them in a special box on the dresser. They ate breakfast to the muted tones of the morning news, a habit that helped them stay hip to what was happening in the city. They didn't have kids, though they talked about it more and more. "Maybe next year," Sarah usually said, and the subject got shelved again. On the kitchen shelf was a collection of mugs from different cities, a little tradition that started on their honeymoon. Jack always drank his coffee from the Las Vegas mug, the first in their collection. Sarah teased him about his habit, but he knew she got a kick out of his little bit of sentimentality. After all, it was the little things that made a house a home, even if they spent most of their time at work, keeping the city safe in their own ways. His shift started like any other with the morning briefing at the precinct. Jack was sitting at his desk, nursing his third cup of coffee from the machine bidder as a cop's joke. The phone chimed every so often with calls. A petty theft at the supermarket, a parking squabble, teens tagging a wall behind the school. Just another day in the life of a detective, where the scariest crime was boredom. Jack's desk was piled high with files on current cases, mostly home break-ins and scams. Nothing big, nothing that'd get the blood pumping. He was just skimming a statement from an old lady about a missing garden gnome when they brought in a loud drunk. Stumbling, he was telling anyone who'd listen how his mother-in-law had robbed him blind. Jack chuckled. Stories like that had been part of the job forever. By lunchtime, the heat outside had peaked, and the AC in the precinct was huffing and puffing, trying to deal with the Arizona sun. Jack headed out on a call, a neighborly argument over a fallen tree branch threatening to turn into a full-blown feud. Routine. Business as usual. Nothing hinting that this sleepy Thursday would be the day his world got flipped upside down. The police radio crackled to life, like waking up from a hot nap. Through the usual static came the dispatcher's agitated voice. All units, code 446. Escape from Lewis Correctional Facility. Repeat. Confirmed escape from Lewis Prison. Jack froze, coffee cup halfway to his mouth. Lewis. Sarah's prison. Something twisted in his gut. Time of escape, approximately 1430 hours. 2 inmates. One ID'd as Michael Raines, extremely dangerous offender. Second, identity pending. All patrol units take up positions per protocol. Suspects presumed armed. Extremely dangerous. The radio kept spewing info, but Jack wasn't listening anymore. He was dialing Sarah's number like a madman. Ringing. Long, endless rings that chilled him to the bone. Why wasn't she picking up? She always picked up. The dispatcher's voice crackled on the radio again, now with details. Attention all units. Info on the prime suspect. Michael Raines, 38 years old, serving life sentence for the Phoenix National Bank armed robbery in 2022. 3 fatalities during the robbery. A security guard and 2 patrons. Identifying marks. 6'2", approximately 190 pounds. Eagle tattoo on right forearm. Scar above the left eyebrow. Jack was scribbling down the info in his notepad when the dispatcher continued. Additional information. Raines' accomplices were gunned down during apprehension, but the stolen money, $4.5 million, was never recovered. This may indicate the suspect's possible escape direction. The precinct was buzzing. Faxes with mugshots were whirring. Patrol officers were hurrying around, passing out fresh photos of the fugitive. In the picture, Raines looked almost ordinary, the kind of face you forget the second you look away. Except for his eyes, cold, calculating eyes of a guy who could kill without batting an eye. Jack tried Sarah again. Still no answer. Unwanted thoughts started swirling in his head. Why today? Why that prison? Why wasn't his wife answering her phone? The next 2 hours were a blur of attempts to reach Sarah. Jack dialed her number over and over, switching between her cell and her work phone. Each ring hammered a throbbing pain into his temples. The subscriber you have dialed is temporarily unavailable. The robotic voice on the line sounded more mocking each time. Hey, Morrison, Sergeant Brian called to him. You get a hold of your wife? Jack shook his head, clutching the phone with bone-white fingers. She was supposed to be on shift, in the South Block. His voice was hollow, like it was coming from far away. That's weird, Brian frowned. We can't get straight info from the prison brass. They're playing it close to the vest. Jack fired off his 10th text message. Sarah, where are you? Please answer. I'm worried. The phone screen stayed lifelessly dark. Maybe we'll hit old Charlie's for dinner? This morning flashed in his memory. Now those words felt like they were spoken in another life. By the end of the shift, the manhunt was in full swing. Helicopters were combing the area around the prison. Patrol cars were blocking the main roads out of town. But the fugitives seemed to have vanished into the hot Arizona air. Go home, Jack, Captain Holbrook said, laying a hand on his shoulder. Your shift's over. Maybe Sarah's already there. The drive home had never felt so long. Jack was driving on autopilot, his head filled with fragments of the day's events. $4.5 million. 3 dead bodies. A life sentence. And his wife's silent phone. Pulling up to the house, he noticed their apartment windows were dark. Usually, Sarah was already home by now, and the warm light of the living room lamp greeted his return. But not tonight. Climbing the stairs, Jack felt a chill run down his spine. The key turned in the lock with the familiar click, but the apartment greeted him with dead silence. Emptiness. An untouched bed. Cold coffee in the Las Vegas mug. In the dark living room, the TV screen flickered. Jack flicked it on, and the room filled with the voice of an emergency news anchor. What he heard made him freeze in place. The world around him started collapsing, burying everything he'd believed in for the last 10 years. Chapter 2. Betrayal. There are different kinds of betrayal. There are those that cut like a knife, quick and sharp. And there are those that kill slowly, drawing out life drop by drop, turning everything you believed in into a poisonous lie. Jack Morrison learned about it that night when the empty apartment and a blaring television became his only companions. He stood in the middle of the living room, clenching the remote in his hand, while his wife's face stared back at him from the TV screen. Sarah's picture from her prison service file, stern. Official, nothing like the woman who made him breakfast that morning. The news anchor was talking about an unprecedented case, an internal investigation, and possible aiding and abetting. But the words came like they were through a wall of water. Lewis Correctional Facility Warden Sarah Morrison is suspected of aiding in the escape of extremely dangerous offenders. The anchor's voice rang with barely suppressed excitement. Preliminary reports indicate Mrs. Morrison helped organize the escape of 2 inmates, including the notorious Michael Raines, serving a life sentence for the triple murder during a bank robbery. Surveillance cameras caught her opening several service doors, disabling the alarm system in Sector C, and Jack collapsed into a chair. On the screen, a fuzzy recording from a security camera. Sarah, walking quickly down a corridor, glancing over her shoulder. Same messy bun, same walk. Even in the grainy image, he'd recognize her out of 1,000. Law enforcement officials are asking all citizens to report any information about the possible location of the suspects. A reminder that the fugitives are armed and extremely dangerous. They are believed to be moving south. Rain's mugshot popped up on the screen front view. Jack stared at those features. A wide forehead, deep-set eyes, a stubbornly clenched mouth. That face. Now it would be seared into his memory forever. The guy who stole his wife. And now, an exclusive report from our source in the prison administration. The anchor lowered her voice to a dramatic whisper. According to preliminary data, a romantic relationship existed between the warden and inmate Raines. Surveillance cameras recorded several suspicious meetings in the prison library, and Jack clicked the TV off. In the silence that followed, he could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen and the clock ticking on the wall, ordinary sounds of their home that suddenly became unbearable. Romantic relationship. Those 2 words throbbed in his head like an open wound. He slowly stood up and went into the bedroom. Their photos on the walls now looked like props in some cruel play. There they were on the beach in San Diego, Sarah laughing, shielding her face from the spray. Their honeymoon in Vegas. She's pressed against his shoulder by the Bellagio fountain. Christmas at her parents'. She's kissing him under the mistletoe. How much of it was real? Where did his wife end and the stranger who could fall for a murderer begin? Jack went to their bed and sat on her side. The pillow still smelled like her shampoo. The same smell she had on this morning when she talked about dinner at Old Charlie's. Now, every word, every gesture of hers in recent weeks took on a new, ominous meaning. Why had she been staying late at work more often? Why had she stopped talking about her shifts? Why did she seem so happy lately? His phone buzzed in his pocket, making Jack jump. Captain Holbrook flashed on the screen. The clock showed 11:47 p.m. Jack? The captain's voice was uncharacteristically gentle. You okay? You holding it together? Tell me it's a mistake. Cap. Jack clenched the phone so hard his knuckles turned white. Tell me that this news is a load of hooey. A heavy pause hung in the air. Somewhere in the background in the captain's office, papers were rustling. Listen, kid. Holbrook sighed heavily. What I'm about to tell you, it's off the record. You got it? Just between us. Talk. We've been through the camera footage for the past 3 months. This isn't some sudden brain cramp, Jack. They were meeting in the library, in the laundry room, in the utility areas. Sarah was disabling cameras, forging duty logs. She knew what she was doing. Jack felt nausea rising in his throat. But why Rains? He's a killer, a robber. During questioning, one of the inmates admitted that Sarah, the captain stumbled, choosing his words carefully, that she had a rep. You know? Rains wasn't the first. It just went further with him. His ears buzzed, like someone had cranked up white noise to full volume. A rep. His wife. The woman he woke up next to every morning for the last 10 years. There's something else, Jack. Holbrook's voice was almost a whisper. We found her phone. It was in the staff locker room. Jack closed his eyes. That's why she wasn't answering. In it, there are messages. Photos. A lot of photos. And not just with Rains. The captain paused. Looks like she was having an affair with prison chief Baker. And with someone from the security detail. Damn, Jack. I'm really sorry. Jack was silent, staring at the photo on the bedside table. Their wedding picture. Sarah in a white dress, smiling so happily, so sincerely. Or was that also an act? Hanging up the phone, Jack felt something snap inside. Reality began to fray at the seams, like an old bedsheet. He stood up and slowly walked to the kitchen, flipping on the light without thinking. On the table was still Sarah's morning mug with the coffee she hadn't finished. A small coffee ring on the bottom. She always left a little, said finishing it was bad luck. The rage hit him suddenly, like a tidal wave. Jack swiped the mug off the table. It smashed against the wall, leaving an ugly brown stain on the light wallpaper. Their wallpaper, the one they picked out together last spring. He started laughing hoarsely, brokenly. God, how stupid he must have looked all this time. A detective who didn't notice that his own wife. The laughter turned into dry, convulsive sobs. Jack punched the wall, not even feeling the pain. Blood appeared on his knuckles, but he didn't notice. Before his eyes was the image of Sarah kissing Rains in the prison corridor. The same Sarah who kissed him this morning, seeing him off to work. He went back to the living room and collapsed into the chair, staring into the darkness outside the window. Inside, there was a void, a cold, ringing emptiness, like in an abandoned house. 10 years of marriage had turned into a handful of ashes, scattered by the night wind. Every memory was now poisoned. Every moment of happiness was questioned. The same question ran through his head. Was there even one moment when she really loved him? Or was he just a convenient cover all this time? A cop husband, the perfect disguise for a woman leading a double life? Somewhere far away a police siren wailed, and that familiar sound suddenly cleared Jack's thoughts. He caught his reflection in the dark TV screen. A haggard face, bloodshot eyes, disheveled hair. Nope, he wouldn't sit here and feel sorry for himself. It wasn't his style. His gaze fell on the detective's badge lying on the coffee table. Detective Jack Morrison, the guy who'd untangled dozens of complicated cases, hunted down criminals, and delivered justice. Well, it was time to take care of his own case. He grabbed the phone again and dialed the captain's number. Holbrook here. The captain's voice sounded tired. Cap, I need a leave of absence. Right now. Jack. There was a warning note in the captain's voice. Look, I get what you're feeling, but a month without pay. I've got enough days saved up. A long pause hung in the air. Jack could almost see the captain frowning, thinking over his words. You know I can't. That officially. Then off the books. Jack gripped the phone tighter. You said it yourself, just between us. I'll just take a vacation. Nothing illegal. Another pause. Then a heavy sigh. Okay, but know this, if things go south, I don't know anything. And Jack, be careful. Oh, by the way, Jack hesitated. Where's Sarah right now? In the county jail detention center. The captain's voice was hard again. She was picked up right after the escape. Jack hung up and went to the window. In the night sky, a police helicopter circled, its spotlight sweeping over the rooftops, like a giant finger pointing the way. Somewhere out there, in the dark, was Rains, the guy who destroyed his life. And now Jack only had one goal. For the first time this endless night, he felt something like peace. A plan began to form in his head, clear, simple, and absolutely ruthless. He'd find Rains, but not to arrest him. Chapter 3. The hunt begins. There's something fascinating about the moment when a person crosses the line. One step, and you're not who you were a second ago. Detective Jack Morrison knew all about it. For 10 years he'd been catching people who stepped over the line of the law. Now it was his turn to take that step. At 3 a.m, their bedroom looked like a crime scene. Jack methodically gutted the dresser drawers, dumped the contents of the closets, checked every corner. He knew. Somewhere here had to be Sarah's laptop. The one she never left at work. The one she didn't even tell her husband the password to. Work stuff. She always joked it off. The laptop was found at the bottom of the laundry basket, wrapped in an old towel. A typical cheating wife's hiding place. So obvious that nobody would think to look. Jack chuckled grimly. 10 years of marriage, and he was just starting to understand how her mind worked. Settling at the kitchen table, Jack booted up the laptop. The screen blinked to life, asking for a password. He drummed his fingers on the tabletop, thinking back to everything he knew about Sarah. Date of birth? Too obvious. Name of her favorite childhood dog? Corny. And suddenly it hit him. He remembered their trip to Vegas, the one that started the mug collection. Sarah won at roulette, betting on the number 23. That number's followed me all my life, she laughed. Mom's birthday, the house number where I grew up. Sarah 23 Vegas, he typed, feeling his fingers tremble slightly on the keyboard. The screen blinked and the desktop loaded. Jack exhaled. 10 years of marriage had been worth something after all. The folders on the desktop were neatly sorted. Work, bills, photos, personal. Too neatly. He opened the email client, but there were only work emails and newsletters. Nothing suspicious. Nothing personal. Think like her, he ordered himself, and then his gaze fell on the browser icon. Webmail. Of course. Only a fool would use work email for personal correspondence. When the inbox loaded, Jack felt everything tighten inside. Dozens of emails, sent from an anonymous address. All from the last 4 months. All signed simply M. In them unfolded the story of his wife's relationship with the inmate. From the first innocent meetings in the library to the detailed plan of escape. With each email, the correspondence became more explicit, more intimate. And the last messages contained clear directions to a small town in Mexico where Rains planned to hide after the escape. Jack leaned back in his chair, drumming his fingers on the table. So, nobody knew about the fugitive's final destination yet. Not the police, not the FBI, not the Border Patrol. That information was only here in these emails, and now only with him. The thought came suddenly, cold and clear as a knife blade. If he deleted all the correspondence, Rains would be sought blindly. Precious hours and resources would be spent combing the area around the prison, checking roads to the north and east. And he'd know exactly where to go. His finger hovered over the delete key. Somewhere in the back of his mind, the voice of duty still sounded, reminding him of his oath of the law of 10 years of impeccable service. But that voice was getting quieter, drowning in the waves of anger and betrayal. This wasn't a question of law anymore. This was personal. Methodically, email by email, he began deleting the entire correspondence, emptying the recycle bin. Then the system log, browser cache, temporary files. Nothing had to be left. No traces that could lead others to the same goal. Now this was his hunt, and only his prey. Getting ready took less than an hour. Everything he needed fit into an old duffel bag Jack got out of the garage. Spare clothes, cash he kept in the safe for emergencies, documents. He acted methodically, like preparing for a special operation, mentally checking each item. In the closet, behind boxes of winter clothes, was a pistol, a Beretta 92 he'd picked up at a drug dealer shootout 3 years ago. He hadn't entered it into the evidence log then. Instead, he put it in a bag and stashed it in his car. A gun with no history, the perfect tool for what he was planning. Jack pulled out the pistol, disassembling, cleaning, and lubricating it in practiced movements. He counted the rounds one by one, as if each one had its own purpose already. On the kitchen table, Jack spread out a map, pressing down the corners with mugs of cold coffee. He knew the route to the Mexican border by heart. He'd been working drug trafficking cases for years. But now he looked at those lines of roads with different eyes. Not as a cop tracking a criminal, but as a man planning a murder. Rains would probably take Highway 95, the fastest way south. But not right away. He'd lie low somewhere nearby for the first day or so, waiting out the hottest phase of the search. Jack circled small towns within a 50-mile radius of the prison in red marker. Motels, roadside diners, abandoned farms, all the places a fugitive could hide. Then he took out a second atlas, more detailed, with maps of the border area. Smugglers called this area the sieve. Too many loopholes, too many blind spots in the surveillance system. Jack had studied these routes for years, trying to close them off. Now that knowledge would work to his advantage. He checked the printout from Sarah's email. The town mentioned in the correspondence was 200 miles south of the border. Not a tourist spot, not a big city, the perfect place to get lost. Or to ambush your prey. In the pre-dawn light, the city felt foreign and unfamiliar. Jack drove his Ford through the deserted streets, mechanically noting the usual details. A patrol car at a convenience store, a blinking traffic light at an intersection, a homeless guy with a shopping cart at a gas station. Business as usual, but now he was looking at it through the eyes of a man who might never come back here again. On the way out of town, he was stopped by a highway patrol, a routine check as part of the fugitive search. A young cop shined a flashlight into the car, recognized Detective Morrison, and saluted. "Have a good trip, sir." If he only knew. Jack turned onto the highway heading south. The rising sun hit the rearview mirror, like it was trying to blind him, to make him stop. But he'd already made his decision. Somewhere ahead, a couple hundred miles from here, Michael Rains was making plans for a new life. Plans that wouldn't come true. On the passenger seat lay the bag with the Beretta. In the glove compartment, maps and printouts. In his head, the route and the goal. Everything else was left behind. The detective's badge lying on the kitchen table, the wedding ring in the nightstand, 10 years of life in an apartment that had become a stranger overnight. Ahead was only the road, and the vengeance waiting at the end of it. Chapter 4. Meeting at the motel. The Bluebird Motel was one of those places where nobody asked too many questions. Peeling paint on the walls, a flickering neon sign with a burnt-out eye, an empty parking lot with cracked asphalt. The perfect place for a man on the run. Or for the one chasing him. Jack parked the Ford so he could see the main entrance and the backyard at the same time. 2 days of searching, dozens of calls to old informants, endless hours behind the wheel. And here he was. Rain's battered pickup, spotted at a gas station 50 miles back, was parked by the far room. Dirty, with hastily blacked out plates. The fugitive wasn't even trying to disguise himself much. Figured he'd shaken the pursuit. The old guy behind the front desk didn't even look up from his ancient TV when Jack came in. He just shoved a dog-eared guest register and a key to a room, muttering something about prepayment. $40 a night, no ID, no questions. Just another business on the edge of civilization. Room 14 right next to Rain's pickup. Jack had specifically asked for it, lying about a noisy party in the far wing of the motel. The walls here were probably thin as paper. Every rustle, every sound from the next room would be his lullaby tonight. Inside, the room looked exactly how he expected. A sagging bed, yellowed wallpaper, a cracked mirror on the wall. Something was dripping monotonously in the bathroom, creating a rhythm like the beat of a metronome. Tick-tock. Time running out. Tick-tock. Closer to the finale. Jack methodically surveyed the place, a professional habit he couldn't shake. A thin partition between the rooms, shared ventilation, a window overlooking the wasteland behind the motel. Perfect layout. He took the Beretta out of the bag and put it under the pillow, so he could reach it with one move. Muffled TV sounds came from the next room. Rains was watching the evening news, probably looking for information about the search, figuring his chances. Jack sat on the edge of the bed, listening to every sound. The man behind the wall didn't suspect that death had moved in next door. The motel bar turned out to be a cramped room with a low, smoky ceiling and a bar polished by the elbows of tens of thousands of lonely travelers. The only customer was sitting in the far corner, hunched over a glass. Jack recognized him instantly, although he'd never seen him alive, only in prison photos. Michael Rains. He looked different in real life than in the pictures. Younger, oddly enough, and more ordinary. Not like a guy who could shoot 3 people in cold blood. A worn denim jacket, 2-day stubble, the tired look of a long-haul trucker who'd finished a long haul. Jack ordered a whiskey and sat at the bar, his back to Rains. In the murky mirror behind the array of bottles, he could watch his every move. The fugitive was methodically swirling his glass, leaving wet rings on the wooden counter. Nervous? Or just a habit? Crappy weather tonight, Rains suddenly said, addressing the emptiness in front of him. The kind of weather that calls for a shot of whiskey. Jack slowly turned on his stool. He'd been preparing for this moment, rehearsing the legend. A sales rep from Phoenix, selling medical equipment. A boring job, a boring life. Nothing to do with the police badge that was lying on the kitchen table. Yeah, it is, he replied, raising his glass. Pouring cats and dogs. Care to join me? Rains nodded at the empty chair next to him. It's not like there's anyone else here. Just like that, a murderer was inviting his executioner for a drink. If this were a novel, readers would say the author had overdone the coincidences. Jack picked up his glass and moved to Rains' table. He introduced himself as Steve, a trucker from Texas. A good story, almost as carefully crafted as Jack's own. They talked about the weather, gas prices, baseball, the usual conversation between 2 strangers in a roadside bar. You know, Rains swirled the whiskey in his glass, watching the amber liquid catch the dim light of the lamp. Sometimes I think that places like this bar are the last real outposts of human connection. Here people still talk. They're not screwing around on their phones or on their laptops. They just Talk. Jack noticed his fingers trembling on the glass. Didn't look like a cold-blooded killer. More like a man who'd been alone too long. I've been trucking for 3 years, Steve continued, working his trucker cover. And you know what's the hardest part? It's not the distances. It's not the lack of sleep. It's the quiet. When it's just the sound of the engine and your own thoughts, hour after hour. What about family? The words blurted out before Jack could think. A cop's habit. Probing, asking questions. Something flickered in Rain's eyes, a quick shadow of pain, immediately hidden by a gulp of whiskey. Just a little sister, the youngest. He smiled, and for the first time that night, the smile reached his eyes. You know, she's something special. When our parents died, she was only 12. I thought she'd break. But she created a support group on social media for kids who've lost loved ones. Can you imagine? She's barely holding it together herself, and she's helping others. Jack felt something tighten in his chest. He came here to kill a monster, and across from him sat a man who was talking about his sister with such tenderness that it made his throat close up. But now, Rain stopped short as if catching himself. Now we don't see each other much anymore. I have work to do. He fell silent, staring into the emptiness in front of him. A heavy silence hung in the smoky air of the bar. What about you? He asked suddenly, looking up at Jack. Is there someone special in your life? Jack imagined Sarah for a moment, the way she was at the kitchen this morning, or the way she was in the camera footage, kissing this man before the escape. I used to have a wife, he replied, but it turned out I didn't know her at all. Rains nodded with unexpected understanding. Oh, those women. Sometimes I think we don't really know anyone, even ourselves, especially ourselves. He chuckled mirthlessly. Sometimes life puts us in a position where. He shook his head, leaving the sentence unfinished. The bartender turned on the TV. News footage flickered. Something about politics, about the weather, about a fugitive. Rains tensed almost imperceptibly, but didn't take his eyes off his companion. Another whiskey? He asked, raising his empty glass. To chance encounters in roadside bars, and to people who still know how to listen. They sat in the bar for another hour. The bottle of whiskey slowly emptied, and the conversation flowed like a river, finding new channels. They talked about the music of the 70s, about old movies, about places they'd been. Rains turned out to be a great storyteller. His stories about long roads and chance encounters made you forget about the time. And with each toast, it became harder for Jack to remember the Beretta waiting under the pillow in his room. You know what's funny? Rains ran a finger along the rim of his glass. Sometimes you can tell a stranger things you wouldn't tell anyone close to you. Maybe that's because tomorrow we'll drive away and never see each other again. Jack felt a chill run down his spine. If you only knew. Well, I should get going. Rains stood up, swaying slightly. Early start tomorrow. He held out his hand. Thanks for the company. John, Jack lied, shaking his outstretched hand. A firm, confident handshake. The hand of a man who'd held both a gun and a truck wheel. Or maybe something else. Good luck on the road, John. Rains walked out, leaving a couple of crumpled bills on the table. Jack watched him walk to his room, a little hunched over, his hands in his pockets. A tired traveler. The man he was supposed to kill in a few hours by going into the next room and pulling the trigger through the pillow. The clock above the bar read nearly 11. Jack drained his whiskey in one gulp and headed back to his room. Chapter 5. An unexpected twist. The worst thing is waiting. Jack sat in the dark of his room, watching the glowing numbers on the digital clock. 2:47. It had been quiet in the next room for an hour. The Beretta in his hand felt unnaturally heavy, as if it was made of lead. He tried not to think about the conversation in the bar, about how Rains talked about his sister, about the way his voice broke when he mentioned his parents. None of it mattered. Shouldn't matter. In the silence of the night, every sound seemed deafening. The hum of the refrigerator in the corner, the dripping faucet in the bathroom, the creak of the floorboards under his feet when he finally got up and went to the door. The doorknob to the next room was just 2 steps away. 2 steps to the point of no return. Jack raised the pistol. 1 shot at point-blank range through the pillow while Rains slept. Clean. Fast. Without extra words or explanations. The hand holding the weapon was firm, not a trace of tremor. The same hands that had served the law for 10 years were now ready to break it. Jack silently approached the door of the next room. His heart was beating steadily. Like a metronome, years of service had taught him to control adrenaline in critical moments. The pistol fit comfortably in his hand. His left hand slowly went to the doorknob. It was time to settle the score. 1 turn, 1 step, 1 shot, and at that very moment, when his fingers tightened on the cold metal of the knob, the silence of the night was shattered by the piercing wail of police sirens. Jack froze. Red and blue flashes were already dancing on the walls of the motel, approaching from the highway. His cop instincts screamed danger. If they caught him here with an illegal weapon at someone else's door, before he could finish the thought, the door was yanked open. Caught off guard, Jack stumbled back into the shadows, barely managing to keep his balance. Rains was standing in the doorway, fully dressed, with a backpack over his shoulder. He clearly hadn't been asleep and was ready to run. Their eyes met. In the dim light of the corridor lamp, Jack saw in Rains' eyes not the fear of a criminal, but the despair of a hunted man. The same man who just an hour ago was talking about his sister with such love. "Help me?" Rains whispered hoarsely, and suddenly his eyes widened with recognition. "John? You're the guy from the bar? God, please, help me get out of here. I'm begging you. I can't get caught by the cops right now." The sirens wailed closer. The red and blue flashes were already flooding the motel parking lot. Jack's finger twitched on the trigger. It seemed like 1 shot and vengeance would be accomplished. But if the cops found a corpse here, if they found him with an illegal weapon, even his detective's badge, left at home on the kitchen table, wouldn't save him from 15 years in prison. No, he would have to look for another time and place for this. And he couldn't let the cops catch Rains either, because if he was arrested, there would never be a chance to deal with him. Jack cursed under his breath. This wasn't how he imagined this night. Not at all. "My car's around the corner," he hissed, quickly tucking the Beretta behind his belt. "Gray Ford. Wait there." Police cars were already pulling into the motel parking lot. Rains darted toward the back exit, and Jack quickly returned to his room, grabbed his bag, checked his documents. Everything had to look natural. He was just a guest who'd woken up from the noise. Stepping onto the porch, he saw 2 cops heading toward the front desk. A third was shining a flashlight through the windows of the first floor. Jack headed for his car, trying to walk calmly, deliberately. Years of service had taught him the most important thing. If you want to go unnoticed, act like you have every right to be there. Rains was already waiting, hiding behind the Ford. Jack unlocked the door. "Back seat. Duck down. Let's go." The engine started on the first try. Jack turned on the headlights and slowly steered out of the parking lot. At the exit, they were stopped by a young patrol officer, a total rookie, probably fresh out of the academy. "Sir, sorry to bother you. We're looking for a dangerous criminal. Have you seen anything suspicious?" "Nope, officer," Jack yawned convincingly. "Woke up from the sirens. Figured I might as well get back on the road. Not going to get back to sleep anyway. What's the point? "Can I see your driver's license?" Jack handed over his license. His heart was beating steadily, not a beat out of place. In the rearview mirror, he saw Rains holding his breath, stretched out between the seats. "Everything's in order, sir. Have a good trip." The patrol officer saluted and waved on the next car. They pulled onto the highway. The red and blue flashes in the mirror faded until they disappeared into the darkness. Only then did Jack allow himself to exhale. "You can sit up," he said over his shoulder. Rains slowly sat up, massaging his stiff neck. "Thanks," he said quietly. "You have no idea." "Shut up," Jack interrupted him. "Just shut up." They drove in silence. The headlights tore the road markings, the occasional road sign, and scraggly bushes from the darkness. Jack turned onto a country road, an old investigator's habit. Getting off the main roads, covering your tracks. Somewhere out there, in the darkness, began a dirt road leading into the woods. The perfect place to carry out the sentence. The criminal didn't yet realize that he would have been better off surrendering at the motel. He glanced in the rearview mirror. Rains was sitting, leaning against the door, and looking out the window. There was something doomed in his posture, as if he knew that his luck would run out sooner or later. A fugitive, a murderer, the man who destroyed Jack's family. Ahead, a turnoff to the forest appeared. Rains suddenly leaned forward. "Pull over. I'm gonna be sick." Jack slammed on the brakes. The car swerved, the tires squealed. He pictured Rains trying to jump out on the run, having to chase him in the dark. But he really just tumbled out of the car and threw up. It seemed the mixture of whiskey and adrenaline had finally caught up with him. "Sorry," Rains mumbled, breathing heavily. "Haven't run like that in a long time." Dawn was breaking over the horizon, painting the sky a dirty pink color. Somewhere in the distance, the first rooster crowed. An ordinary morning in the middle of nowhere. But nothing about this morning was ordinary. Chapter 6. Confession. The dirt road ahead disappeared into the forest. Jack peered into the pre-dawn gloom, searching for a suitable turn. Here, in the middle of nowhere, no one would hear the gunshot. No one would find the body quickly enough to link it to the incident at the motel. The Beretta pressed against his lower back with familiar weight, reminding him why he was there. Rains was sitting in the front seat, hunched over and looking out into the darkness beyond the window. He'd been sick 10 minutes ago, and now he had a faint odor of whiskey and bile about him. The murderer who had ruined Jack's life now seemed so vulnerable. "Listen," Rains suddenly said hoarsely, without turning his head. "What I'm about to tell you, it might shock you. But you're the only one I can trust. The only one who can help me. I have nowhere else to go. I know I have no right to ask, but please listen to me carefully now." Jack didn't answer, searching for a gap between the trees. Couple more minutes and it would all be over. "I have to confess something terrible to you. Tell the truth." Rain's voice trembled. "The whole truth. I'm not who I said I was at the bar. I'm a fugitive. You probably heard it on the news already, right?" "What did I hear?" Jack hissed, turning onto a barely visible forest track. "About the escape of a dangerous murderer from prison? The one who killed 3 people. 4, Rains corrected quietly. "If you count my little sister." Jack glanced at him quickly. In the dim light of the dashboard, Rains' face seemed carved from stone. "Yes, that's me. Hold on. Don't worry. I won't hurt you. Just listen, please." He ran a hand over his face. "It's all about my little sister. When I said I killed her, it means I just couldn't save her. You know what's the worst thing? When you're holding your dying 13-year-old sister in your arms, and the doctors say there's something that can be done, but the operation costs so much that you realize you can't save her." His voice broke. Jack slowed down. Something in Rain's tone made him listen. Don't think I'm some kind of thug. I really tried. Honestly, worked 3 jobs. Sold everything I could. Got into debt. Emily held on. She's so strong. Every time I came to the hospital, she smiled. Can you imagine? She has this damn cancer eating everything alive inside. And she smiles and says, "Don't worry, Mikey. Everything will be okay." Rains gasped, trying to control his voice. And then the doctors said she only had 3 months left. Maybe 4. And you know what I did? I went to the bank to ask for a loan. And they wouldn't even listen. Insufficient credit history. No collateral. For them, it was just words. Protocol. But for me, it was a death sentence for my little sister. Jack felt his fingers involuntarily tighten on the wheel. He remembered the crime scene photos. 3 bodies, blood on the marble floor of the bank, shell casings. I didn't want to kill anyone. Rain seemed to read his thoughts. I swear to you, the plan was simple: go in, scare them, take the money. But the guard reached for his gun. Panic broke out. He paused for a second. Every night I see their faces. Every damn night I beat myself up for it. But you know what's the worst thing? I would still do it again. For her, I would. A heavy silence fell in the car. Somewhere far away, a night bird cried. That's why I escaped from prison. Rains turned to Jack. I got a note the other day. Emily's been having bad pains. The doctors said it's a matter of weeks. And the money, that damn money, nobody ever found it. Only I know where it is. And I have to get there. I have to at least try. What about Sarah? Jack didn't recognize his voice. That warden who was on TV who helped you escape. What's the story with her? Rains smiled bitterly. Sarah, you learn to read people quickly in prison. She was, he hesitated, choosing his words. She was one of those who revel in the power over the inmates. She liked to humiliate, manipulate, especially the ones who were kind of cute. She had a whole collection of lovers among the cons. A real harem. Jack felt nausea rising in his throat. Seducing her wasn't hard, Rains continued. She was looking for new amusements herself. She bragged about how she cheated on her cop husband, how she slept with the warden. And she also bought my story about the hidden money. He stopped short, glancing at Jack's white knuckles on the steering wheel. Keep going. Yeah, she knew I hid millions on the outside. And to tell the truth, she came up with the idea of the escape herself. She bragged that she could organize anything as long as I could pay. She liked feeling like a Bonnie to my Clyde. So, you could even say that she seduced me in exchange for half of the money that I took during the robbery. Rains shook his head. But she didn't know the main thing, that I was never going to share with her, that all these promises were just words. Empty words for a chance to see my sister one more time. Jack wrenched the wheel, and the car stopped on the side of the forest road. The first rays of the sun were breaking through the treetops, painting everything in a ghostly morning light. He killed the engine and sat staring ahead. 10 years of marriage. 10 years he'd lived with a woman he apparently didn't know at all, who made fun of him, cheated on him, played with other people's lives for the thrill of it. And he'd believed in their love, believed in their future. A crumpled envelope fell out of Rain's jacket pocket. Jack mechanically picked it up. It was a letter from the hospital, dated last week. A bill for treatment and a medical report. As he read, something inside him shifted, turned over, fell into place. A long silence fell. Only the wind rustled in the treetops, and somewhere far away the first birds woke up. So, all this is to see your sister? Did I get that right? Jack said slowly. Okay, But you do realize they're still going to find you? That they're going to catch you sooner or later? Rains smiled bitterly. I realize. But if I do nothing, she'll die. You understand? Just die. And I won't even get to say goodbye. He paused. I don't care what happens to me after that, but I just have to see her again. At least once. Jack stared at the letter from the hospital, which he still held in his hands. Then he started the engine. Where to go? Show me. To the Santa Rosa Clinic. Rain's voice trembled with sudden hope. It's in Mexico, about 4 hours past the border. Jack turned the car around in silence. The border was about 3 hours away, and they needed to find a place for an illegal crossing. As a former cop, he knew all the smugglers' loopholes. Now that knowledge would be useful for another purpose. The beretta at his waist seemed lighter, or maybe he just stopped feeling it. The sun was slowly rising above the horizon, painting the desert landscape in reddish-yellow tones. Ahead was a long road, full of dangers. But this was no longer a path to revenge, but to something else. To something that could change them both. Chapter 7. At the hospital, the Santa Rosa Clinic turned out to be a small 2-story building on the outskirts of a Mexican town. White walls covered in wild vines, a quiet courtyard with a fountain, nurses in starched uniforms. Everything here breathed the peace that can only be found in places where life and death meet every day. Jack parked the Ford in the shade of an old plane tree. They'd been on the road for almost 8 hours, crossing the border on an abandoned dirt road known only to smugglers and local farmers. They'd barely exchanged a few words during all that time. Each was lost in their own thoughts. Rains was sitting, clutching the door handle with white knuckles. His face, haggard after these hours, seemed carved from stone. Listen, friend, he said hoarsely, without turning his head. If she looks really bad, I need to be ready for that. You understand? Please come with me. Jack nodded silently. He suddenly caught himself thinking that in these hours he'd almost forgotten who they were to each other. A fugitive and a cop, a murderer and an avenger. Only 2 men were left, one of whom was about to meet with his dying sister. The reception area smelled of medicine and chlorine. A young nurse behind the desk looked up with tired eyes. Rains said something to her in Spanish. Jack only caught the name, Emily Rains. The nurse flipped through the ledger, nodded, and reached for the phone. A few minutes later, a gray-haired man in a white coat appeared in the hall. Dr. Hernandez, according to the badge on his chest. Senor Rains? He held out his hand. We were expecting you sooner. Something like condemnation flashed in his eyes, but it quickly changed to professional neutrality. He gestured for them to follow him. Recent tests show progressive deterioration, he said, leading them down the corridor. Metastases are spreading faster than we expected. Without immediate treatment, he paused, choosing his words carefully. Tiempo es critico. Time is critical. Rains walked with his head down, as if each of the doctor's words hit him physically. Jack stayed a little behind, ready to support him at any moment. He didn't understand where this protective instinct came from. She's conscious now, the doctor added, stopping at a white door with the number 214, but very weak. Please, no more than 15 minutes. Rains froze in front of the door, his hand trembling over the handle. He turned to Jack. Will you come in with me? At that moment, he didn't look like a murderer or a fugitive. Just a frightened older brother who was afraid of what awaited him behind the door. The room was flooded with soft light from a wide window. The white curtains swayed almost imperceptibly in the light breeze. In this calm, almost serene space, the bed seemed an island where all the pain in the world was concentrated. Emily looked like a porcelain doll, just as fragile, pale, with huge eyes in her gaunt face. and 4 drip quietly ticked away the seconds. A monitor next to the bed drew the zigzags of her heartbeat, weak but stubborn, like life itself. "Mikey?" Her voice was barely audible, but it rang with such joy that it made Jack's throat close up. "You finally came." Rains sank to his knees by the bed, grabbed her small hand, all bruised from the IVs. His shoulders shook. "I'm sorry, kiddo," he whispered through sobs. "Sorry it took so long." "SSH." She smiled weakly, stroking his head with her free hand. "You promised you'd come, and you always keep your promises, don't you, big brother?" Jack retreated to the wall, feeling like an uninvited guest in this space of love and grief. But he couldn't leave. Something held him, made him watch. "I tried so hard to wait," Emily continued. Each word cost her effort, but she stubbornly spoke. "You know, I even started a diary. I wrote down everything I want to tell you when you come. I don't want to die alone in the whole wide world." She coughed, and a red drop appeared on her pale lips. Rains rushed to wipe it away with trembling fingers. "Quiet now, honey. Don't talk like that. You're not alone. I'm here. I'm here. And I'll save you at any cost." "Mikey," she shook her head weakly. "My silly, beloved older brother. I know what you did. I know about the bank. About everything." The nurses watched the news. Rains froze. Jack involuntarily leaned forward. "You shouldn't have, Mikey." Tears sparkled in her eyes. "Not at that price. I'm not worth." "You are," Rains almost shouted. "You're worth everything. Everything, you hear? And I'll bring the money soon. We'll start the treatment. You'll get better and we'll—" "Mikey," she shook her head weakly. "My silly, beloved older brother. I'm not afraid of dying. I was only afraid of one thing, that I wouldn't get to say goodbye." At that moment, Dr. Hernandez entered the ward. Behind him came a nurse with a folder of documents. "Senor Rains," the doctor said softly, "we need to talk. Please, come to my office." Rains reluctantly pulled away from his sister. She was already dozing, exhausted from the conversation, but even in her sleep continued to hold his hand. The doctor's office smelled of coffee and old medical journals. Dr. Hernandez laid out images and test results on the table. "There is an experimental treatment," he said slowly, carefully choosing English words. "A new chemotherapy protocol developed in Switzerland. We have had cases of remission in the final stages." "What are the chances?" Rains asked hoarsely. 30%. Maybe 40 if you start immediately." The doctor paused. "But the cost? This is a very expensive treatment. Without prepayment, we cannot." "How much?" Rains leaned forward. The doctor wrote a number on a piece of paper and slid it across the table. Jack, standing by the window, saw Rains clench his fists. "I have the money," he said dully. It's hidden. I just need a couple of days to." "We don't have a couple of days." The doctor shook his head. "Every hour of delay reduces the chances. If you don't start treatment in the next 24 hours. He didn't finish, but it was already clear. They stood in the empty hospital corridor, stunned by the doctor's words. 30%. If treatment started right now, delay meant death. "Listen." Rains grabbed Jack's sleeve. His eyes burned with desperate hope. The money is so close. In our mother's house, in the suburbs of El Paso. I hid it in the attic under the old boards. 4.5 million in cash. We can be there in 5 hours. I'll give you half, just help me. Please." Jack looked at him in silence. At the man who killed 3 for this money. At the brother who was ready for anything to save his sister. "Okay," he finally said. "Let's go." They headed for the exit at a fast pace. Rains was talking about exactly which way to drive, where to turn, which key to use to open the old lock. His voice rang with excitement and hope. The sun was mercilessly hitting their eyes as they came out to the hospital parking lot. The Ford was standing in the shade of the plane tree, where they left it. It seemed like a lifetime since that moment. You know, Rains stopped at the passenger door. I didn't even believe I'd meet a person in my life I could trust. Someone who would understand. You are the only light in this freaking world. If it wasn't for you. He reached for the door handle but froze, hearing a metallic click. Jack held up the police handcuffs. Michael Rains. Jack's voice sounded hollow, as if from underwater. You are under arrest. I'm Detective Jack Morrison, Phoenix Police Department. Rains slowly turned around. His face reflected a whole range of emotions. Disbelief, understanding, the pain of betrayal, and finally mortal exhaustion. Emily, was all he could say. She'll die without this money. Hands behind your back, replied Jack, carefully looking somewhere over his head. We're going back to the States. Chapter 8. Paying the piper. The border post on the American side greeted them with a gray dawn and barbed wire over concrete walls. Jack showed his badge to the officer at the entrance, and the gates slowly opened, letting them back into the States. Rains was sitting in the back seat, his hands cuffed. He hadn't said a word the whole way from the hospital, as if he were dead. At the border station parking lot, 3 police cars with flashing lights were already waiting for them. Captain Holbrook personally came out to meet them, his face beaming with pride for his subordinate. You sly dog. You fooled everyone. Brilliant work, detective. He shook Jack's hand firmly. To track him down alone, cross the border, make the arrest. This will go down in the books. Rains was pulled out of the car. In the light of the rising sun, he seemed a pale shadow of the man who just a day ago was sitting in the motel bar and talking about his sister. Now there was only emptiness in his eyes. The following week turned into an endless stream of congratulations, handshakes, and flashbulbs. His story filled the front pages of all the local newspapers. Hero detective catches dangerous criminal alone. Exemplary cop solves case of the century. Phoenix can sleep soundly. Journalists were waiting for him at the precinct doors, clamoring for interviews. A solemn ceremony in the city hall brought together the city's entire elite. The mayor personally pinned new captain's bars to Jack's uniform, giving a passionate speech about the valor and honor of the police badge. Colleagues applauded standing. In the front row, the police chief's wife beamed smiles, the same one who a week ago had sneered at the husband of that warden. You are an example to all of us, Captain Morrison, the mayor was saying, shaking his hand in front of the cameras. A true symbol of justice and retribution. Jack smiled and thanked, spoke the right words about duty and the law, shook countless hands. But the hospital ward in Mexico and the girl who had only days to live were all he could see. After the ceremony, the police chief took him aside. You know, Jack, you're in line for the deputy chief of the homicide division spot, with a pay raise and a new office. Consider this an advance for a brilliant operation. I need people like you. A new office, a new position, a new life. All this should have meant triumph, the pinnacle of the career he dreamed of. So why did his mouth taste of ashes? Oh yeah, his wife, Sarah. The trial against her was to be a landmark case? The press was already preparing sensational headlines about the prison carman and the guard who became a criminal. The prosecutor was demanding the maximum penalty for aiding and abetting the escape of a particularly dangerous criminal. Everything pointed to the fact that the former Mrs. Morrison would spend the coming years on the other side of the prison bars. But on the third day of the hearings, the news broke that turned everything upside down. A medical examination revealed that Sarah was 2 months pregnant. A real commotion broke out in the courtroom. Journalists whispered, trying to calculate the dates. The judge frowned, leafing through the case files. Establishing the exact paternity at this time is not possible, the expert reported dryly, given the nature of the defendant's connections. At that moment, Sarah burst into tears, dramatically pressing her hands to her stomach. Her lawyer immediately filed a motion to change the measure of restraint for humanitarian reasons. The press was ecstatic. No one expected this twist. Later, the judge ruled 2 years probation with home confinement. Given the special circumstances, past service, and the position of the defendant, the protocol said. Sarah left the courthouse with her head down, but in the corners of her lips was a barely perceptible smile. She had wriggled out again. Or could it be that the real father of her child was someone else? Who knows? I wonder, Jack thought, reading the news about the sentence. Does she herself know who the father is? Rains? The prison chief? Or one of her many wards? Jack filed for divorce the day after the trial. 10 years of marriage were compressed into a few sheets of A4 paper. Graphs, check marks, signatures. Such simple actions for destroying a whole life. Sarah came to the divorce proceedings in a modest gray dress, emphasizing the barely noticeable roundness of her stomach. Sat 2 rows away from him without raising her eyes. No trace of her usual self-confidence remained. A pregnant woman under house arrest, abandoned by her hero husband. The press would appreciate such an image. Are you sure of your decision? Asked the judge, looking at Jack over her glasses. Maybe you should think about saving the family? After all, there is a child. This child is not mine, Jack cut off. And this woman, she hasn't been mine for a long time either. Sarah winced as if slapped. At that moment, he looked her in the eye for the first time in a long time. He didn't see remorse or love there, only fear of loneliness and anger at herself for getting caught. The process took less than an hour. They had nothing to do with each other anymore, no common children, no property worth claiming. 10 years of married life had evaporated like morning fog under the rays of the sun. Coming out of the courthouse, Jack felt strangely light, as if he had gotten rid of a heavy burden that he had been carrying on his shoulders without even noticing it. He was no longer the husband of that warden. Now he was just Captain Morrison, the hero cop who caught a dangerous criminal. But you're probably more interested in what happened to Emily, Rain's sick sister? On that very morning, when Detective Morrison triumphantly returned to Phoenix with the arrested criminal, something amazing happened at the Santa Rosa Clinic. An anonymous transfer arrived in the hospital's account, exactly the amount needed for the experimental treatment. The payment purpose column said only 3 words: for the treatment of Emily Rains. Doctors immediately started therapy. And what Dr. Hernandez later called a little miracle happened. The girl's body responded to the treatment. A month later, the tests showed the first signs of remission. And later, Michael Rains received a letter in prison. A crumpled hospital envelope, and inside, a photo of a smiling Emily surrounded by nurses and a short note written in uneven childish handwriting. I'm getting better, Mikey. I told you everything would be okay. No one ever found out who made that transfer. Maybe it was some unknown benefactor, touched by the story of the dying girl. Or maybe someone who knew where the money from the robbed bank was. On the day the letter came, the guards saw Michael Rains crying for the first time. But those were tears of happiness. His little sister would live. In his cell, he carefully pinned the photo to the wall. Now he had something to serve his life sentence for. And somewhere far away, in a Mexican clinic, his sister was learning to smile again, not knowing that her salvation had been made possible by the man who should have hated her brother more than anyone else in the world. They say every cop has a case that changes him forever. For Captain Jack Morrison, the case of catching Michael Raines became such a case. But not because it brought him fame and promotion, but because it taught him the most important thing. Sometimes justice and the law go different ways, and everyone has to decide for themselves which way to go. If you like this story, support the author with a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your emotions in the comments. Thank you.